HFY was known for its silence. Sent into deep space by the Galactic Council on a scientific observation and contact mission. This ship boasted advanced sensors and neutral behavioral protocols. It was a 500-meter-tall behemoth with a polished, black and orange alloy surface. It had a crew of 60, but in this organism, where everyone had a role, there was one man who almost no one cared about, Narelle Evane, a reserve systems technician, a solitary worker who lived in the lower layers of the ship's energy systems amidst the hum of the generators. The officers on the bridge didn't even remember his name. Most of the time they didn't even notice his presence. He lived quietly, in the shadows, checking the systems, disappearing into the clutter. He didn't greet anyone, nor did anyone. His nickname on the ship was Shadow Technician. Narelle navigated through rusted pipes and reached the thermal control panel. One of his devices was a resonance analyzer of his own design. It would record the ship's vibrations, helping to detect any abnormalities in the system. But this system also did something else. It listened. It listened to space, to the silence, to the cries lurking beneath the systems. Narelle had developed this system for years. He had devoted all his free time to it. It seemed like a pursuit of no interest to anyone, an idle curiosity. But to him, this emptiness was the very meaning. That morning, a regular scanning shift had begun on the ship's bridge. Radar operator Lanus Rook frowned when he saw a signal bouncing on one of his screens. "Commander, there's a strange object." Captain Varel San was a stern but disciplined commander, over 50 years old. He quietly approached the monitor. How close? 9.7 kilometers. Steady. Energy emissions? None. Thermal signature? Also near. 0 image. The screen went black. Then, a shape emerged. Pitch black. Its form indistinct. A shadow that had swallowed the stars. "My God," Linus whispered. "Is that thing ahead of us?" Antimatter at the level of shadows, like invisibility, but physical. The bridge was silent. Everyone was glued to the screen. Captain Varel said, "Put all systems on alert." But there are no weapons. This could be first contact. But that contact would never come as expected. A whisper began to circulate through the ship. All personnel were monitoring the radar feed. Some were panicking, some were praying. Narelle, meanwhile, checked the latest recordings on his own device. For the first time, he had detected an external wave in the ship's vibrations. Not like music, not like code, either. It was like a statement. But the strangest thing about that moment was that the statement sounded familiar to him. It was as if someone he hadn't spoken to in years, had whispered his name. Alarm bells began to ring. "On the bridge," Linus shouted. "The object is moving." But this movement wasn't progress, it was disintegration. That black object, like a seed, began to crack, to open, and millions of pieces broke free from it. Structures, each one different from the other, but arranged in formation. They enveloped the ship. Commander Varel's voice trembled. "Is there no escape?" Linus said. "Every direction is blocked. They're watching us." In that moment, everything went silent. The engines, the systems, the signals. The only thing that could be heard was the heartbeat inside the ship and neural steps in the shadows. Silence isn't just a void, it's often a stare, a presence staring but not speaking. HFY struggled to breathe amidst that silence. The black ships were motionless, but as if thinking, or listening, or making a decision. Captain Varel San rubbed his chin as he stared at the holoscreen before him. Lanus rescanned the frequency range, full spectrum. "They might be using an invisible signal." Linus's lips tight, said, "This is the third time I've done it, sir. There's just an echo, a repetitive, meaningless clatter, but the system can't identify it. Project the visual scheme." The screen flashed. The black ships formed a perfect circle around HFY, each equidistant, placed with mathematical precision. It was like a shape, not an army. Virel's eyebrows furrowed. This is choreographic, not random. Linus nodded. Each ship is at a precise 72.4-degree angle relative to the other. It's purposeful. Silence. At the same time, on the ship's lower decks, Narelle Evane was operating her old vibration recorder. After the black ships appeared, the amount of data her device was receiving had increased 100-fold. But this data wasn't sound, it wasn't frequency. It wasn't like any other form of communication we know. They were talking to the ground. To space. Two forms. Each small ship was like a fragment. Within the structure formed by the assembly of the fragments, there was a repeating rhythmic pattern, a kind of spatial language. Narelle began drawing in her notebook. Triangle, circle, five-fold symmetry, then circle again. Even the distances between them followed a fixed pattern. If this wasn't language, what else could it be? Tensions were on edge on the bridge. Weapon systems couldn't be activated without a command, but every officer stood at attention. Tactical Officer Kirvan placed his hands on the console. "Sir, I suggest we take a defensive position. We can establish cover, increase heat shields." Virel sighed. "What does the first contact policy say?" Linus muttered. "At first sign of threat, alert. Not attack. A warning," Vaughn asked, his voice rising. "They've surrounded us with 1,000,000 pieces of ship. If that's not a threat, what is?" The commander fell silent. He turned his gaze to outer space. One of the ship's internal sound systems crackled, a tone that came from no other frequency, yet suddenly appeared. There, a low-frequency hum below the human ear. Narelle immediately turned on his recorder. He analyzed the tone wave. The wave wasn't sinusoidal. It wasn't a straight line either. It was like a skeleton, rhythmic yet expressive, like an architectural structure tracing a word across space. In the middle of the entire recording, there was a brief gap, just a second, and then the same pattern again. But this time, the units were positioned differently. It was like a wheel had turned. The same language, different emphasis. Narell gasped. This wasn't just a repetition. This was a question and answer. The system on the bridge suddenly alerted. "Sir," shouted Linus, "someone is approaching the ship. A micro-sized craft, spherical in shape, 0 energy emissions. But it's headed directly at us." "Stop it," shouted Kier. "We can't do it. It's not interacting with our navigation system. It's moving outside of reality." A warning suddenly flashed across the inner corridors. "Foreign object approaching Layer 3 node." Virel clenched his fist. "This is a breach. Even unarmed, this is an attempt. Activate defensive protocol 7. But at that moment, Narelle jumped. His chest was heaving rapidly. His eyes were fixed on a fixed point. He was sketching frantically in his notebook, a black sphere. The center, 7 rings around it. Then he drew a diagram resembling the interior layout of Ophir 9. The structure sent to them was responding to the ship's interior layout. Asterisk, they were trying to understand, and the signal coming from outside wasn't communication, but a simulation. Narelle retrieved his holographic recorder and digitized his drawings. Then he took the fastest elevator to the bridge. When the doors opened, everyone turned. Some didn't recognize him. Some were surprised. Captain Virel saw Narelle face to face for the first time. "You, who Evane, technical personnel. I have an urgent data discovery," Narelle said, out loud for the first time. The determination in his voice was like an unexpected echo after years of silence. "The data I have indicates that the language of these structures can be deciphered. They don't speak, they communicate through form. The structure that envelops us isn't fixed geometry. It's a morphing thought form. They change shape to express themselves. And right now, they're trying to understand us." Dead silence fell on the bridge. Virel approached. "How do you know this?" Narelle slowly handed his digital notebook to the captain. Because I've been listening to these frequencies for years. Their echoes in space, their vibrations, and this is a living diagram. They're analyzing us. And right now, they're demanding an answer. What kind of answer? Narelle closed his eyes. With their language, with form, with rhythm, with a symmetry that shows we give them meaning. Narelle's footsteps echoed down the spiral staircase that descended into the depths of 049. Normally, only maintenance and emergency crews could descend to the ship's lowest level, the areas near the energy core. But now, one of the ship's most precious keys was walking into that darkness. He was alone, but for the first time, this loneliness felt like power. He carried only a data crystal. It carried a new frequency array, modeled to mimic the signals sent by the black ships. These frequencies needed to be synchronized with the ship's molten core. Only then could an answer fully understandable to the alien structures be generated. Narelle approached the terminal. His hands were steady. He touched the glass surface, and the system powered up. Codes began to flow, initiating update, energy, synchronization. Just then, the ship shuddered. Alarms began to blare on the bridge. The black structures had broken their stasis and began to reposition themselves. Very slowly but surely, Tactical Officer Kier Vaughn rushed forward. "Sir, they're shifting to a new geometry. This could be an attack preparation." Captain Varel shook his head. "No, that's an answer. We're speaking, they're responding. Yvain is below. Contact is being established." Lena's voice became garbled, but this time they're forming a much larger structure. There's no void at the center. The entire form is intertwined. Reflection found, and then an image. A dark planet. Countless structures on it, but none of them have windows. The entire civilization is built from the outside in, not from the inside out. Beings in shadow form speak not with thoughts, but with form, their language, their physical existence. For a moment, Narelle felt herself walking among them, but not with her own body. As a frequency, they don't belong elsewhere in the universe. They belong to another dimension. Only their reflections fall into our space-time, and that's why no one understands their language. Because they don't speak, they become. Captain Varel's voice came over the onboard broadcast. "Yvain report. Has contact been established?" Narelle opened her eyes slowly, but her voice wavered. "Yes, but this isn't a contact. This is recognition. They now recognize us. Me, that is. I offered them a symmetry with the ship, and they offered their own. Symmetry. What do they want? To be alone, but to be known. They fear annihilation. The splitting we saw at first contact was actually a defensive reflex. To multiply themselves, making them incomprehensible. But now, they remain a single form. At that very moment, the structures outside changed shape again. No longer a circle, they formed a spiral. The spiral began to rotate, but not in real space, but through an optical illusion. Everyone observing thought time itself was warping. Then a burst of light, and everything stopped. Linnaeus looked at the screen. They're leaving. They're all being drawn into a single point. Something like a tear has formed in space. They're passing through. Tactical Officer Kier whispered. "They didn't harm us." Virel stared out. "Because someone spoke to them." In the core compartment, Narelle sank to his knees. Sweat was streaming down his back, but his face was calm, because for the first time, someone had actually heard him. Every cell in Narelle's body vibrated as he emerged from the core chamber. The contact with them had affected not only his mind, but also his physical being. Something was changing beneath his skin at a microscopic level, but for now, no one noticed, or so he thought. Above, on the ship's bridge, silence reigned. All the screens had gone blank, then slowly returned. The alien beings had retreated in a spiral, but what remained was indescribable, not peace, but rather a suspended tension. Captain Virel broke the silence. Lyenas, restart the system scans. Check energy levels, the timeline, everything. Lyenas slammed his fingers into the console. Commander, this is impossible. What? The clocks have gone backwards, not forwards. The internal timeline has shifted 3 hours, but our biological traces still carry the experience of being in the forward direction. We have been sent back, but our memories remain. Kier frowned. What does that mean? They might have tampered with time, Virel said. Or we were pulled into their time and then dropped back. We don't know. When Narelle returned to her own room, someone was waiting for her. Captain Diren Tal. I need to speak to you, she said, her eyes unblinking. What did you tell them? Narelle quietly poured a glass of water. She drank it. It was as if a cosmic hum still lingered within her. I didn't speak. I became. That's not the answer. Narelle paused. Then she pulled a data crystal from her pocket and handed it to Diren. This is the coding of the patterns they left. But it's not just mathematics. Whoever deciphers it, deciphers their intent. Diren took it hesitantly. I need to convey this to the captain. Take it. But from that moment on, things began to change on the ship. First, the communications officer, Henos, disappeared. Then the guard in the engineering bay was deactivated. There was nothing on the visual recordings. It was as if the beings had vanished. Lyenas noticed something. These things aren't happening on their own. Some of the equipment exposed to Neural's frequency has begun to change. They've left biological traces. The codes could be penetrating the ship. Virel immediately commanded, "Seize Narelle." Narelle, walking down the corridor, was stopped by a military team. He didn't raise his hands when guns were pointed. They think he's dangerous, Diren said, coming out from behind. They're wrong. I know, but the captain is scared. Everyone is scared. Narelle just bowed his head. A crack has broken through their fear. That crack will grow, but I am just a translator. As Narelle sat silently in the isolation cell, something new began to happen outside the ship. Satellite systems detected a back echo in outer space. The beings passing through the spiral weren't returning, but they had left something, an echo, coming closer, unseen but felt. And then Lyaina screamed, "That thing echoes within us. It matches Neural's frequency. It's not a sign, it's a reflection. This contact isn't over yet." The ship writhed in silence. The echo emanating from the spiral wasn't a physical vibration, but a mind-shaking sound. Not a frequency, but a feeling. Not a word, but a meaning. Narelle had closed her eyes in the containment chamber, not hearing the voice because it was now one with her. Captain Virel was reviewing reports on the bridge, trying to understand the systems that were constantly disappearing or malfunctioning. They were focusing all their attention on external threats, overlooking the transformation within the ship. Lyenas froze. Commander, all biometric sensors indicate a non-human pattern within Neural's body. A coded consciousness seems to be flowing through him, but not from outside. From within. Virel looked up. What does that mean? He might be transforming. At that same moment, Narelle's cell opened. Diren arrived with 2 armed soldiers, but the soldiers were trying hard not to meet his eyes. They wanted me to take you, Diren said. But I'm leaving you. Narelle bowed her head. It's not right, but it's necessary. Are you still you? I am us now. Diren hesitated. Then she put down her weapon. You know the way Narelle walked. The very sound of her footsteps seemed to sync with the ship now. Every door opened automatically. Every sensor recognized her as a friend. The echo returning from the spiral resonated with her. When she reached the bridge, an alarm sounded, but no systems fired. Virel jumped to her feet. Narelle, how did you get here? I was summoned, and I am here. Is this an invasion? No, this final contact. At that moment, all the screens lit up. The void of space twisted once more, and the black spiral, this time not just one, but a million different shapes, enveloped the ship's exterior. The ship shook. The crew threw themselves to the ground, but Narelle remained standing, and then he spoke. But his voice was no longer human. It was an undefined yet intelligible sound that echoed throughout the ship. Expression initiated. Humanity. Frequency defined. Meaning being transmitted. Light patterns suddenly appeared on the screens. Not code, not language, emotion, memory, pain, compassion. All of humanity was being transmitted into the being's consciousness in seconds. And so was the reason they had come. Kier, in tears, whispered. They were alone. Lena shook his head. They weren't frightening us. They just wanted to be heard. Narelle turned and looked. I was alone. You didn't hear me. But they heard me. Now you hear me too. The lights went out. The spiral dissipated. The ship fell back into silence. But this silence was something else. Defined, understood. A fulfilled silence. Narelle stood on the bridge. Humanity's interpreter had become his own echo. Virel approached him. What do we do now? Narelle closed her eyes. We will live, but no longer alone. Months later, humanity had derived its first contact protocol from this encounter. A new science was born. Harmonic interaction. And in every settlement, there was a law. No signal is insignificant. Narelle's name stood under that law, and the silence of space was no longer alone.